Matt and JD, we are back for the 44th FIDE Chess Olympiad 2022, round number 6. How are you doing, JD?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited because we're getting to look at India 2, and I have my favorite result for India 2 today. What was that result again, Matt?
India 2 losing today, 2.5 to 1.5, but we're going to focus on the game that the India 2 player Gukesh D won, board number 1. And how are Gukesh D's stats looking so far in this tournament?
He's pretty fantastic. I'll give you that. I got to give you that, he's their little diamond in the rough. They finally faltered, but yeah, they do have a guy who's on somehow magically he's on 6 out of 6.
Yeah, he's 16 years old, 6 out of 6. He just increased his rating to 2719, which leapfrogged him over India's Vidit. So he's third ranked in India on the live ratings, and he's 26th in the overall rankings, just as a 16-year-old.
Do you think they'll substitute him into the top team for the rest of the event? Put Vidit down here?
I mean, they might be kind of wishing they had him. That's actually a really good point. So let's look at his game today against Gabriel Sargsyan from Armenia. And Armenia is now currently in first place after today's round.
Yep. So we get another D4, D5 line that we've been looking at a lot lately. And we again this E6, Knight of 3, and this sort of Rogozin, Nimzo, Queen's Gambit decline thing. We're seeing this again. So this is the third day in a row that we found a pretty spectacular game that follows this line. We saw Carlsen play Bishop to G4. We saw against Carlsen getting played E3. But here Gukesh shows another idea with just Queen to A4. What do you think of this idea, Matt?
I do kind of like Queen to A4. I've been going through games each day trying to find what we should look at, and I just keep seeing this structure over and over and over. So it's like either we're going to look at a Petrov, a kind of double king pawn, or we're looking at this structure. But I think these are really interesting.
Yeah, I like this idea a lot. The point is that, it looks like we have a fork here because ideally Black would probably like to play C6, but they can't because of the bishop. And so we're forcing the knight to come out. And when we force the knight to come out, Black's going to have a hard time playing C5, which, as Magnus showed, is a source of tremendous counterplay for Black. And so without that on the table, Black's maybe going to struggle to find a plan.
That's a really good point. So we got two center pawns to one. Oftentimes, what the side with one pawn wants to do is either play c5 or e5, and it's just not so easy to do in this position.
On the flip side, though, the queen is maybe not so happy on a4, though, because we would like to see some sort of attack, and with the queen on c2. So we have spent a tempo to try to stop the c5 maneuver.
Yeah, but you know what's nice about this game from White's point of view? Look at what Gukesh did. We just talked about this yesterday. He delayed the f1 bishop, brings this bishop in, right? He develops every other piece except the f1 bishop. And now Black finally kind of runs out of moves and just says, okay, I'm going to take on c4. And Gukesh is able to recapture and only move that bishop one time.
I do think, though, that Black had some more moves they could have made that they could have prolonged this a bit more. Something like rook e8, bring the bishop back to f8. They could have played a6, bishop d7. I feel like that they could have made some more waiting moves. So I'm not entirely convinced that playing this immediately was absolutely forced.
Yeah, I agree. White maybe had a3 or rook to d1 and kind of waiting moves on their end, but yeah, I agree. Black could have waited longer. Bishop takes, bishop d6, queen c2, and now we see e5. So Sargsyan does figure out how to get one of those pawn breaks in the center. Knight and bishop both guard e5. What do you think of this move?
I think that since you can't play c5, the only move is e5. And I think it makes sense to do it right now because White's king is still in the center. Black is already castled. This bishop, it frees this bishop out to come, I mean, maybe f5. I think f5 would actually be a pretty ideal square, stopping White from getting to here. So maybe something like a g6 move later, although g6 is probably crazy. But I do like this, trying to strike in the center while the white king is still hanging out there.
Yeah. And one cool thing about this game so far, after d takes e, knight takes e5, we are actually following a game. Gukesh D was playing the white pieces against Lekong Liam. This is from the Beal Rapid, which was just last month. Just like I think it was July 18th that they played this. So you know both players have that game fresh in their mind. I am sure Sargsyan looked that game up, and Gukesh is the first player to deviate. So he played knight takes e5 in that game. But in this game now, we see bishop to e2, just retreating the bishop and looking kind of passive. And actually, the engine isn't in love with it. The engine says knight takes e5 is the better move of the two, but he's trying to surprise his opponent, I think.
I think, yeah, partially he's trying to surprise his opponent, and I also think that this is perhaps a more aggressive way to play, and it's more imbalanced, especially with the follow-up that he has in mind here. I actually quite like this a lot.
So you think
Uh,
he's encouraging maybe knight takes f3 by black?
I think that he's encouraging it. I think he's praying for it. I think it's exactly what he's hoping is going to happen here. It's a pretty sick idea, really. I'm a big fan of this idea. I don't know that I would have come up with it myself over the board, but I'm certain that after his game in Beal last month, he sat home and cooked this idea up with the engine. And I think he thought that he was going to create a crazy off-balance game for his position right now that looks pretty calm. But
Yeah,
he's given up almost all of his edge for the chances to play for an imbalanced position.
that's a really good point about cooking something up. Like if you and I are playing a game in a tournament and we don't know each other, we're probably going
Yeah,
to try to figure out what does that person play and maybe
yeah,
find some hole in a previous game. At the top level though, oftentimes those are their strongest points. Like even if you think you could capitalize on something last game, they have something new cooked up or multiple things cooked up.
yeah. So of course, and then this F takes. I think this is so cool. I don't know that I have the cojones to play this myself, but because it just feels like I'm voluntarily taking a structural weakness. But I mean, White's idea is really straightforward. I'm just gonna play Rook G8. I'm gonna castle this way, and I'm just gonna start shoving everything over to this direction, and I'm gonna mate you. And that's pretty well exactly what happens in the position.
Do you think he had on his mind that I need to win this game? Like the perfect score streak?
I think that I think he seems like the kind of player that's always playing for a win, which is great. I mean, he is a young kid. He's probably not emotionally mature enough to handle losses, so he's always going to like rush for wins. Okay, that's rude to say. I shouldn't have said that, but you know, but yeah, I think
Yeah,
that he's
don't
an
make any YouTube comments, guys.
yeah. I think that he's energetic and wants to play these unique off balance and like a draw. I mean, he's playing board one against a slightly higher rated opponent. He's doing great, but it's important that he wins for his team. And
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that he's playing this sort of controversial looking play on purpose.
And both of these teams have similar ratings across the board. And having the white pieces, his live rating is actually probably a little bit higher going into this game, over 2,700. But maybe that's part of it too. He's like, as one of the players with the white pieces in this match, I have to try for a win. And it's not
Yeah,
really taking any big risks in terms of engine eval. Engine is just fine with this line.
yeah, for sure. A6. It seems like a weird move, but the idea is clear. He knows that black or that white's going to go queenside, and so he's already preparing to start storming. Of course, this pawn got a little drunk there, but yeah, I think that the lines of plans for both sides quite clear. White's going to jump down the G file. Black's going to storm the pawns on the queen side, and it's just a matter of who's faster.
So we see queenside castle by white. Pawn to b5. Here comes black's pawn storm. And rook h to g1. What I like about these kind of attacks is they can just resonate with us as kind of club level players. Like it's just, let's put everything on the G file, go for the checkmate. Shouldn't be too difficult.
Yeah, just clear, clean play. I mean, I wish I could argue with you, but I really just can't.
B4 by black, taking the C3 knight. This is one where the engine just complains very slightly. It's not a huge fan of B4 because knight to E4 is just a good square for the white knight anyways. What do you think about this knight to E4 move by white?
I think that it's actually quite. I think it's. I mean, of course, it's a nice centralized knight, and we're also attacking this the one of the only defenders of the black position. And so,
Yes,
if that defender goes away, I think that we're quite pleased with trading these two knights off the board because I think it helps us attack.
that's
I
exactly
really
right.
I realized that like the engine is saying things like bishop to b7. I think bishop b7 is like really weird and not in the spirit of what black's trying to do because it's just going to be in the way. I would like to open the b file and put a rook here And I probably still want to try to get my bishop out to one of these squares to try to attack from this angle here.
So I'm
So I,
curious. Bishop b7, knight e4, knight takes e4, f takes e4. It looks like there might be a tactical issue with this. So that's why the computer liked either queen e7 or bishop b7 by black, one of these two moves, because there's kind of an issue for white now. You have to actually take time to guard this pawn. Whereas in the game line, you didn't have to do that. Like knight takes e4, um, f
I
takes
think that makes
e4.
sense. Looking back at that line for just a second, oops, we jumped ahead here.
Yep,
Looking back at the line that you gave,
here we go.
there we go. Sorry, I'm fumbling around. I can't read notation. One of these days I'll figure it out. But if you have to defend this pawn, this slows down your own pawn storm because we're used to seeing the A and the B pawns storming, but White's really trying to storm with the E and the F pawns. And after this Queen E7, these pawns are kind of held back and a little bit immobile, whereas Black's pawns would still be able to rush forward.
Yeah, so not the easiest idea to understand, but Stockfish is showing that black should have been a little bit more prepared for this idea. So knight takes, f takes, queen e7. So now we see this pawn is only attacked once, and it's already defended once. f4 by Gukesh. Here comes the attack.
And it's super important that he plays f4 right now because, for example, if he waits to play f4 and say lifts the rook somehow first, well, then the bishop can come and he's back to that same problem where he's forced to defend the pawn somehow.
Good
So I
point.
think it is critical that f4 happens right now so that he can meet bishop b7 or some other attack on the e pawn with e5.
And what's the threat after f4? There's an
The
immediate
threat,
threat.
well, the immediate threat is that this bishop is running out of squares.
Mm-hmm. And what should black play?
What should black play? I mean, the scary thing for black to play is like maybe f6 to try to stop e5.
Yeah,
Instead, that's not really what happens.
it's the only good move, though, according to the engine. Playing pawn to f6 here.
I don't know that I could have played pawn to f6 though, if I'm perfectly honest with you. I mean, maybe me looking at this, I might try to move the queen out of the way, or I might even try to do something like c5 and then planning to meet e5 with dropping the bishop or something. I don't like that. Actually, I just don't like black's position anymore. I
No,
thought it was comfortable, but all of a sudden I'm not feeling so great. You remember that time in this game where white was behind in development? Because it certainly doesn't look like that anymore.
no, not at all. Here's an interesting line. If f6, bishop to d3. So we've both been trained. Don't open up your kings unnecessarily. But the computer says black is actually doing just fine here. You can play king h8, and after pawn to e5, you can take here. And this is not with check. And all of a sudden, we went from this game where white was the only one attacking to just a super dicey position where black has some play again, right? All of these things trade off. This king is starting to get a little bit more exposed, and the engine's saying 0.00. So even though you don't like black, he's in the game if he plays f6, and the engine backs it up.
Blah 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 blah. So a5 got played, and he hits him with e5 immediately, and so he still does have a square for the bishop, but these pawns are coming forward now with tempo, and it's difficult to deal with this. I mean, the only move is this bishop c5. There's no other ideas in the position.
Yep.
I mean, I suppose you could try to interject b3, but like that's not getting you anywhere. So bishop c5 forced. The bishop's really not happy on c5. I don't think. I don't know what it's doing here.
And it's kind of a loose piece. It's attacked once, defended once, so that can create tactical issues too. And
Yeah,
f5
for
is not
sure.
playable because queen takes e5. So Gukesh has to shift gears slightly instead of the pawn push plan. Switches over to the double the rook plan. Rook's on the g file.
Yeah, I mean, this is just supernatural play. It's bishop. He wants to get rid of his light squared bishop, which I guess he thought it didn't have anything better to do with. But perhaps it was better to already try to stop or put something in the way of this rook. He's going to be forced to play g6 at some point anyway, and maybe it's not quite clear where the bishop should be. So something like g6, and if we just try to double immediately. Maybe you just move the king out of the way, and you're going to go put the bishop on f5.
Yeah, I like that line. I think what black probably missed is that white can ignore the bishop a6 move, which is what happened in the game. Gukesh just leaves the bishop sitting on e2 because there's a checkmate threat. And I think,
Yeah, this is pretty sick. I actually, when I was looking at this, my first thought was, why can't I take? But then I saw, okay, check, and I was like, it's just a check. What's the big deal?
yeah,
But the
right.
problem is, it's not just a check because the rook here, we're not looking at this check. We're looking at this check. Or if you don't want to move your queen because that's too much energy with your arm, you can also just play this.
And sometimes those like across the board tactics are easy to miss. That queen's just kind of sleeping there on c2, eyeing over this pawn. But at first glance, I did like bishop a6 when I looked at it, because if white takes, let me get back to that move. If white takes and the rook takes back, this rook swings to g6. I just thought that was kind of a cool defensive idea. And if white has to move the bishop, maybe that bishop gets to this important d3 square at some point, starting with rook a to d8. So it felt like a decent way to play for some counter chances.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but it doesn't feel like it progresses Black's attack. It
Yeah.
feels more like it's, but well, clearly there just is no really good way for Black to progress their own attack. They just have to deal with White's initiative.
So g6 played. And now bishop takes a6, rook takes a6. And the rook actually feels a little bit clumsy here on a6 because it's not coming to the g6 square. And maybe it wants to go to d8 and try to help out on the d file.
Yeah, and it can't get to the D file because of this beautiful pawn.
Yeah, and look at the threat here. f5 played. If white had another move, queen to c4 forks the rook and pins the pawn to f7, which is just creating big problems on the light squares for black.
But this hangs a pawn, right, Matt? Like, or actually, Gukesh is probably more like, oh no, my pawn.
Yeah, oh no, my pawn. Let's just do queen takes here. F takes g6. What a
Open
move.
it up against the queen.
And there's really no answers for black. I mean, Stockfish is saying he's just busted. Okay, let's say he tries to hold on to this bishop. Then what?
Well, it's just I mean, this has got to be a mate, right? Because you're forced to come here, and then we do this. You're forced to take it. We make us a queen,
Yeah.
and this looks like a pretty nice mate to me.
And that bishop is still double attack. Didn't even defend the bishop.
Who cares about the bishop? That bishop's not even on the board anymore.
Yeah. So bishop a7 played, and the computer does not like this. The only move that kind of kept black in the game, surprisingly, was rook to c6, trying to get a little bit of play down this file.
Yeah, I think rook to c6 is kind of a nice idea, and it does kind of keep the game in the balance. White's still got an initiative, but there's some threats now, at least.
So the line could go king to b1, and now the computer likes rook to d8. Yeah, I agree with you. Getting a little bit of counterplay for black.
I think that you can still continue as the game went though, and you're still going to have a good line. But
Yeah,
that's definitely a more complicated way to play. This bishop to a7, that's it almost feels like passive. I'm not sure how it's really helping you defend the king side or attack our queen side.
and the top move here is king to b1. And one of the ChessGoals users just mentioned this on our 1e4 course. How do you know when to play king b1 in these opposite side castling positions? And I think it is tricky. And we're seeing here even a 2700 plus player misevaluates this. But let's see what the difference is. e6 played in the game. Why is it important to have king to b1? What do you think?
Well, at first I thought maybe the reason was that we had this idea and trading off the queens, and that maybe if without the queens on the board, black could survive. But that really doesn't seem to be the case because we can just play takes takes, and then again we have this f takes g6, and if you try to grab back this way, the bishop hangs. So that idea doesn't really work. So it's not actually clear to me. Perhaps the idea is to take this way, and then if we grab this guy, um, yeah, I don't get why this is important to me. We can't take here but we can play h6, and after we advance, yeah, I mean, okay, fine, you take, we take, and we take. I don't I don't know. I have yet to see a line here that says that we should be playing king to b1. It's really not clear at all.
I think it might be after something like this. So let's say the rook drops back. Now your queen c5 works.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
so there's the queen trade ideas, but then also like we'll see in the game, there's a tactic where white actually clears this bishop off of d2. But if the e pawn is attacked by the bishop for black, that could create some additional tactic. So it's just a
Ah,
nice
because the
move.
e-pawn would be attacked with check, I suppose is the point.
Yep, exactly right. So it's just a nice move to get the king out of the way. But e6 also very strong. White still holds the advantage at this point.
Yeah, it's very direct maneuver, very, very direct, aggressive play. And this is really complicated to try to figure out like where do I exchange, where do I not exchange?
Yeah,
And I mean, I don't know what to do. I
this
mean,
is where we
clearly
have
black did
the
no.
this is where we have the engine benefit, right? Like we see that it was a small mistake playing e6, but it's super hard to play this for black.
Yeah, as showed. I mean, Sargassian. I'm not going to try. I can't pronounce names.
I
His
think
name's
it's
not John.
Sargissian. That's what I've been going with.
Let's call him John because I can pronounce that.
Gabriel.
There you go, Gabriel.
So
So
he
king to
plays,
h8.
yeah, king h8, just kind of sidestepping. And now, again, the best move is king to b1. And this time Gukesh finds it. And this is setting up a beautiful tactic on the next move.
Yeah, it is really, really, really sharp. I do love this a lot. So he takes this pawn thinking that he's safe, but not realizing that well, it's just not safe.
If
Uh,
you want to pause the video, viewers, try to find this move if you haven't seen it. Okay, now we can show it.
yeah, you're not gonna you would if you pause the game, you're probably wasting your time. But
Bishop takes b4. Look at this move as the immediate tempo on the queen. So essentially, black has to take. It's either pawn takes or queen takes. They take with the queen. And now queen to g2, threatening mate on g8. That's such a sick tactic, giving up the bishop like that just for this kind of g-file checkmate pressure.
it's not like G file checkmate pressure. It's like unstoppable G file destruction. Like I don't, and it's really nice that because this idea only works like you can't capture anywhere here first because this rook could come across. So the fact that it only works because this pawn's still sitting here and shutting
Yes.
this rook out.
And the king had to be on b1. So you need the king on b1 and this pawn on e6. Because after this, it looks like, oh, black can just do a queen trade. And this was played in the game, right? And you got to figure out, okay, if the queens come off, black is winning this endgame if I don't formulate an attack. After queen takes queen, pawn takes back, now we see e7, the only winning move for white in the position.
Which is great. I mean, he had to see this idea in the follow-up. So the rook's got to move, of course, and then we just give a check. And the point is, like, it's not a mate or anything, but we've removed the defender of the queening square, and so we end up with this queen versus a rook bishop and a super exposed king with lots of weak pawns, and
Yes.
like neither one of those black pieces are very active at all.
And oftentimes when you're trying to evaluate a queen imbalance for like two rooks or a rook and a minor, what matters most is the side that doesn't have the queen. How many weaknesses do they have in the position? And like you noted, these pawns are just extremely weak. They're all pawn islands. Most of them are isolated. And that queen's just going to have a heyday trying to attack all these free pieces.
On the flip side, though, I mean, this pawn seems like it might fall. Like if these two pawns somehow could fall, I feel like we could set up a defensive fortress.
But like, let's say queen takes e5 was played here. Actually, I like this in between move. Queen here, check first. Because if the king went backwards, you could actually take this pawn. And if rook e6 played, you have a fork this way, king and bishop. So it's like black has to constantly watch for rook and bishop forks. And
Yeah, there's which is ends up being the huge problem in the position because his king is so exposed. If we had a position where, say, both of these pieces were over here by the king instead of across the board from them, I think the evaluation might be substantially different.
yeah, you're right. I think that the fortress is what you got to look for black. And you have to make sure with the rook and bishop near the king that you can just hold all the other pawns. Don't give white a passed pawn. And that's where maybe you could hold the fortress.
But that's just not the case here.
Yeah. So queen g5 check, rook blocks, and now we see queen takes a5. So nice little maneuver, and this secures the first pass pawn on the board. I think Gukesh had all of this calculated. He knew he was going to get a winning position. and now it's just kind of on him to show the technique to finish.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, he allows this check, just pops out of the way, this check, and he can't take this pawn, which he would like to because the bishop is hanging. So he does this, but now
And he
just
couldn't
a
take
check.
e3 because queen c3 check.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
everything's a
Again, the
fork.
king is too open. The king's just way too exposed. King f8, and he just keeps picking up pawns with checks and threats of forks, and eventually, Black finds himself in a situation where they don't have any options. So rook to e2, finally threatening to maybe try to take this, but now it's over. King e4, you got to go to f8, and then this b4 check, and you've got no square that doesn't hang your rook. So if you come to this square, this check picks up the rook. If you go to this square or this square, then this check picks up the rook. So the rook's gonna fall, and even I can beat a bishop with a queen.
Yes. So we get a resignation here by Sargsyan. And the cool thing with that endgame, when we first hit the queen against rook and bishop imbalance, black was up 1 pawn. Black did not win a single white pawn after that, and white won 3 pawns, so now he's up 2 pawns in the end. Like, just
Yeah,
dominant performance in the endgame.
yeah, for sure, for sure. It was an excellent, beautiful sort of game, but alas, wasn't enough. Wasn't enough. He only got 1 point for this win, and the rest of his team failed to get much in the way of points at all. And India 2 went down.
Yeah,
How did your other? You got a couple more India teams that you're in love with. How did they do today?
well, the India 1 team tied 2-2 against Uzbekistan. So India 2 lost, India 1 tied their match, and India 3 dominated 3.5 to half against Lithuania. So I have the standings up on the screen. Clear first, Armenia with an impressive 6 match points in 6 rounds. How are your teams
Yeah, they're
doing?
still on a perfect score. But the U.S. beat Iran 2.5 to 1.5. Caruana pulled out the big win against Magshulu. Magshulu. I tried. I tried. Okay.
And that puts us in clear second, right? We're the only team with 5.5 out of 6.
Yeah, clear second. So we're certainly going to face Armenia tomorrow, which I think our chances against Armenia are pretty good because our board 4 outrates their board 1 by 56 points.
That's a crazy stat. So all 4 of their players are under 2,700, and our board 4 is 2,750, somewhere around
Yep,
there.
2754.
Wow.
So I like our chances. I think we have really good odds of pulling into first place as the United States. Some other teams, I was happy to see that Serbia upset Poland. Poland a much stronger team than Serbia, but Serbia took them out 2.5 to 1.5. Pretty excited about that. Germany also beat Italy, so I'm happy on that front as well. India 3 creamed Lithuania.
And how did Cuba do?
Cuba tied Spain, which again is impressive. Cuba is like they shouldn't be doing this well, but they're on a tear. I mean, Cuba tied Spain, and again, just like tomorrow or the next day, because it's the rest day tomorrow, Spain's board 4 outrated Cuba's board 1 by a substantial number of points, and Cuba still held out the draw.
Yeah, that's impressive. You know what other team I'm kind of impressed by? Kazakhstan. They are the 40th seed in the event, and they have 5.5. Is that right? 5.5 points.
Yeah, it looks that way. Norway lost again. Magnus won, but Norway lost. Same story with India too, right? Gukesh won, but they lost, so that sucks for them. But
Oh, 5 points for Kazakhstan. Sorry, I misspoke. It's 5 wins, 1 loss.
yeah. So tomorrow rest day, and then we come back. Oh, wait. So Iceland took on Zambia, who the U.S. played. No, wait, they didn't play those, but Iceland beat Iceland won as well. So I'm excited about Iceland. The Puffins.
I think, was it Norway that just played Zambia? Because we looked
Yeah,
at
yeah,
it.
it was Norway. So Norway creamed them, and then Iceland did as well.
Ouch. All right, so rest day tomorrow, and we will be back on Friday for the recap. I think we'll probably be highlighting the US against Armenia match. I just have a feeling, but we'll see which games are the most exciting. Let us know in the comments again. Who are you surprised by, and who do you want to see win coming up? Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.